Howdy folks, this is Lee. Today we're going to carve a pumpkin. I'm just going to do a basic introduction on how to carve a pumpkin for Halloween. Just kind of going over the basics on some of the stencils, some of the patterns, and some of the products that are out there. And so basically we're just going to begin. As shown here, what you need, of course, is a pumpkin. I grew my own this year, but of course you can go to the grocery store and get a pumpkin that's of decent size for around, $5 or something. But I also like to use a lot of newspaper because you never know how messy it can get, especially with kids in the house. And I've also got quite a few tools that I like to use. Those Pumpkin Master kits that you see in the store, those are great. They have a lot of tools included in them, and they also have stencils, so you don't really have to print out anything on the internet or go searching around or make up your own. They've got some nice patterns in the books there that you can use, and I really like the tools also. Basically, in most of the kits that you get, they kind of vary, but in most of the kits you get a regular saw blade, and then a finer, more detailed saw to kind of etch around some of the details in the corners and some smaller things. You also get like a tracing wheel, something that you can use to trace the pattern onto the pumpkin. And you also get some scoopers. Sometimes you only get one. In some kits you get two, but a scooper comes in handy, to get out the guts. So some other things that I like to use. You're going to need something to attach the pattern onto the pumpkin. So I use just regular masking tape. So this is what the stencil looks like with it being attached to the pumpkin using the masking tape. You'll notice that it's not a perfect fit. It's kind of like fitting a stamp on a beach ball kind of thing. It doesn't fit perfectly. You're gonna have some creases. You're gonna have some areas where the pattern kind of is broken off or overlaps, and you're just gonna have to compensate for that. So try to find a pumpkin that's large enough to where you don't have many of those issues, but also if you do have those issues, it's okay. So the next thing you'd want to do is the tedious process of actually stenciling, or not stenciling, but tracing the pattern onto the pumpkin. And in this case, I used the that tracing wheel that comes with some of the kits. I find that to be. So this is what it looks like after you've got it all traced onto the pumpkin. You'll see that there are a lot of little tiny holes. You don't want to rush yourself. You don't want to overdo it. Patience is the number one skill to have when you're carving pumpkins. Just kind of take your time, and it'll turn out great. And so as you can see here, as I'm taking the paper off, you'll see that the pattern was traced onto the pumpkin. And so next, what we would want to do is actually carve. And so what you would do is you would use the regular saw to cut off the top of the pumpkin, and then carve out all of the pieces that you would want to carve out. And now in this example that I'm showing here, it's a very simple carve. You're not doing any shading, you're not doing anything fancy. You're just cutting out completely the pieces that you are supposed to cut out, that are indicated on the pattern. And so again, take your time, and this is what the finished product would look like after you're done. So this is what Ariel looks like on the pumpkin after everything's been cut out. This whole process up to this point probably took about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. This really isn't that difficult. Around the eyes and the nose and on the face, it gets a little delicate, so you'd want to take your time there. And the number one thing you'd want to do is you want to start with the big pieces first. Get the easy ones cut first, and then go for the detailed pieces, because you would want to make sure that you don't want to have the detailed pieces cut out and then have you put your hands on them later or put pressure on them later while you're trying to cut out the bigger pieces and then potentially break your pumpkin. And another thing you want to do is as you're cutting out the pieces, leave them in place in the pumpkin until the very end, and then push them out, kind of like a puzzle piece, or something. Push them out at the end, but leave them in place all the way up until the end, because having them in place, they will help the pumpkin stay intact. They'll sturdier. And so now you just kind of clean up a little bit, take care of a few corners and odds and ends, you know, kind of clean it up a little bit, and then you can put a light in there. I use a miniature kind of LED flashlight that's got some saran wrap covering it so you don't get the pumpkin gunk all over the flashlight. I just put some saran wrap over it, and then I put the flashlight in there, turn it on, and it works great. I don't really use candles. I do have a couple of those tea candles, but those are kind of like my last resort. But I usually use small flashlights or some of the battery-operated fake candles to put in there. And so yeah, this is what it looks like when it's all done. I'm kind of impressed and kind of happy with it. Again, this took about close to 2 hours to completely finish from start to finish. The bulk of it was, you know, spent on tracing the pattern onto the pumpkin and then actually cutting out that pattern. Obviously, that takes the longest, but so yeah, this is kind of an intro and basic setup for carving pumpkins. This is what I do. It's not by any means the best way of doing it, but I found this to work pretty well for me. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any tips that you'd like to share. Comment below, and thanks for watching. And be sure to check out some other videos that I post later that'll have some more advanced pumpkin carvings in which I do some shading and some other things like that. So again,